When the first lantern lit beneath the ice, Ilya Marrow almost drove the drilling rig into a crevasse. She saw it through blowing snow, a single warm gold light glowing under 6 meters of black glacial ice where nothing should have existed but trapped air, mineral fractures, and the slow dead pressure of frozen centuries. For one impossible second it looked like a star had been buried alive. Then it moved. Not drifting. Walking. Ilya jerked hard on the steering levers and the rig's left tread screamed against ice. The machine fishtailed sideways, 40 tons of steel and drill housing sliding toward a blue-white crack opening in the storm-churned plain. Warning chimes burst alive in the cabin. Loose tools flew from a shelf. A coffee tin smashed under the brake pedal. Come on, come on, come on. The rig shuddered, bit, and stopped less than a meter from the crevasse edge. Silence followed in ugly chunks. Engine growl. Wind outside. Her own breathing far too loud inside the cabin. Ilya sat rigid in the driver's chair with one gloved hand locked around the lever and the other pressed flat against the dash as if she could feel whether the machine meant to betray her again. The heater vent coughed lukewarm air at her knees. Frost spidered across the corners of the front glass despite the cabin heat. Beyond that glass, the storm drove snow over the ice in long silver sheets beneath the floodlights. No lantern. No buried star. Nothing at all. She let out a slow breath through clenched teeth. The northern shelf did this sometimes. Days without sleep, white horizons, too much cold, too much machinery, too much isolation, it put reflections in the mind. Men saw roads where none existed. Women heard doors closing under the ice. One tech in the spring convoy swore he'd watched a church sink beneath the glacier with all its bells ringing and a choir visible through the roof glass. They sent him south after that and pretended it was for his lungs. Ilya had mocked him for 3 solid days. Now she was alone on Survey Track 8, 40 kilometers from Blackwater Station, with a drilling rig idling on cracking ice and the very strong desire not to become poetic about hallucinations. She reached for the radio mic. Track 8 to Blackwater, she said. Come back. Static. She thumbed the switch harder. Blackwater, this is Ilya on 8. Read. More static. Then a burst of distorted weather data from some drifting relay buoy. No human voice. Of course. Storm interference had been building since midday. That was why she'd been stupid enough to push the run this late in the first place, finish the core line before the blizzard closed the route, get back to station, get paid, stop hearing the drilling company say the word efficiency as if it were an apology. She should turn around now. Every trained instinct she possessed said so. Then the light appeared again. Farther left this time. A warm gold lantern glow moving beneath the ice. Ilya's whole body went cold in a way the weather had not yet managed. Because now she could see the shape around it. A person. Tall. Slender. Carrying the lantern low in one hand. Walking through the darkness under the glacier as if there were a road down there only she could see. Snow hissed across the windshield. Ilya stared. The figure stopped. Then, impossibly, tilted its head upward as if meeting her gaze through meters of black ice. And raised its free hand. Not waving. Pointing. At something beyond the floodlights. Ilya turned instinctively. At first she saw only storm and darkness. Then her rig light struck the outline of a half-buried structure 50 meters ahead, a hump in the snow where the survey map showed nothing, a ridge of old metal barely breaking the surface. Not natural. Not ice. Too straight. The ground under the rig gave a low, deep groan. Crack lines raced out from beneath the left tread. Ilya did not think anymore. She slammed the rig into reverse and hauled back on the levers with all her strength. The machine jerked backward just as the ice shelf ahead of it collapsed. Snow and blackness dropped away into a widening sink pit where the buried structure had been hidden. Ice slabs sheared off and vanished into dark with the sound of a building swallowing itself. A burst of old air blew up from below, dry, mineral, stale, carrying the faintest trace of oil and something else. Smoke. Lantern smoke. Ilya backed the rig until the treads hit stable frost ridges. Then she killed the engine and sat very still while the storm moved around the machine and the newly opened hole steamed in the floodlights like an exposed wound. No lantern was visible beneath the remaining ice now. No walking figure. Only the pit. And, down inside it, half uncovered by the collapse, the curved black roof of something man-made. Her radio clicked. A voice burst through in fragments. Lya. Track 8, you reading? Storm spike hit the. She snatched the mic. Blackwater, I'm here. Ilya. Relief, sharp and brief. Where the hell are you? Your beacon jumped a full 100 meters off route. That was Nessa Vale. Station Operations Chief, former glacial rescue diver, current tyrant over everything with a power line or fuel ration. Ilya had known her for 4 years and trusted her in the specific way one trusts avalanche dogs and blunt instruments, completely, but not romantically unless one had serious problems. I found something, Ilya said. Silence for one beat. Then Nessa, that sentence has never once improved your life. Clarify. Ilya looked out at the sink pit and the exposed roof beneath. Snow curled through the torn opening, catching in broken vents and rail lines. There's a structure under the ice, she said. Old. Big. The shelf over it collapsed. Static hissed. Then Nessa's voice changed just enough to strip all humor out. Company structure. No markings. No map reference. Could be a pre-grid bunker. Could also be gas void over old thermal junk. Get clear. I'm already clear. Good. Stay there. I'm waking a team. Ilya hesitated. Because she had not yet said the stupidest part. Nessa heard the hesitation immediately. What? Nothing. What? Ilya closed her eyes once. I think I saw someone under the ice before it collapsed. Silence. Then, very calmly, Nessa said, You've been on shift 14 hours. Yes. You slept 4 hours before that. Yes. There is a storm. Yes. Say the rest of that sentence again and listen to yourself. Ilya rubbed a hand over her face. Fine. Maybe I saw something that looked like someone. That was better. Stay in the cab and don't do archaeology. The line clicked dead before Ilya could answer. She would later remember that exact phrasing with resentment. Because 10 minutes later, when she climbed out of the rig to secure the perimeter beacons, she found a lantern burning at the edge of the pit. It was old-fashioned in the worst possible way. Not one of Blackwater's electric storm lamps. An actual lantern. Brass frame, smoke-dark glass, tiny controlled flame behind it that somehow did not go out in the wind. It hung from a looped metal handle and gave off a warm amber light that looked wrong against the blue-white storm. It had not been there a minute ago. Ilya stood with the perimeter beacon in one hand and stared at it. Then she looked down into the sink pit. Something glimmered in the dark below. Not a reflection. A row of lights. One by one, far under the exposed roofline, buried windows were waking. Blackwater Station had been built by people who assumed permanence was a thing machines could bluff into existence. Everything about it was oversized, overbolted, and overinsulated. Steel habitat cylinders on pylons, drill bays sunk into windbreak walls, fuel towers caged in lattice shields, heavy pressure doors thick enough to stop debris storms, corridor joints wrapped in heated flex membrane that rattled all winter like something trying to gnaw through. The station crouched against the glacier edge under a permanent halo of work lights and exhaust vapor, the nearest thing to a town within 300 kilometers. Most people there lasted one contract. Some lasted 3. A few, usually the damaged or the stubborn, stayed long enough that the place began to mistake them for part of itself. Nessa Vale had become one of those people. By the time the crawler convoy reached Track 8, she had already read the geological map twice, cursed the survey company 3 times, and loaded enough gear into the rescue sled to invade a medium-sized bunker or lose a friend in style. The storm had eased from murder to threat by then. Good enough. She climbed down from the lead crawler before the engine fully died, boots hitting packed snow in a hard practice stride. Headlamp on. Harness cinched. Sidearm at her thigh because the ice fields had once coughed up enough feral scavengers and desperate smugglers to make prudence fashionable. She saw Ilya standing by the rig floodlights, coat open, hair full of snow, expression locked somewhere between vindication and disobedience. And there, by the sink pit, glowing like a bad idea. The lantern. Nessa stopped walking. "What," she said flatly, "is that?" Ilya lifted both hands slightly. "You told me not to do archaeology." "That is not an answer. I found it after the collapse." Nessa stared at the brass lantern. Then at Ilya. Then down into the pit where rows of amber lights shone behind black glass under the ice like the eyes of something old finally deciding to blink. Behind her, the rest of the team arrived in pieces. Rian Mercer, station medic, too young for his permanent expression of disappointment but wearing it well. Big shoulders. Steadier hands than his age had any right to justify. He jumped down from the second crawler carrying a trauma case and looked from the lantern to the lit windows without a single visible step through surprise, which Nessa respected. After him came Joran Pike, company geologist and resident coward with a doctorate. Thin, elegant, chronically underdressed for reality, and now horrified to find reality again exceeding his tolerances. "Oh no," Joran said immediately. "No. No, that is not good." "You don't know what it is yet," Rian said. Joran pointed at the pit. "It's buried. It's lit. It's older than station records." "Name one version of that sentence that helps me." The last out of the crawler was the woman Nessa hadn't asked to join and had somehow failed to prevent anyway. Thalen Voss. She landed lightly in the snow, straightened, and lifted her hood back with one gloved hand. The floodlights caught her face and horns at once. Her skin was a rich deep blue like cold water seen at night. 2 polished black horns swept back from her temples in clean powerful curves, ringed near the base with thin silver bands etched so finely they flashed when she moved. Snow had gathered along the shoulders of her dark coat and in the long braid hanging over one shoulder. Her eyes, a pale gray-green, were fixed not on the people but on the lit structure under the ice. Nessa swore under her breath. Thalen was not station crew. Officially she was a historian attached to the Polar Heritage Office, which was the government's gentle fiction for person too useful to insult but too inconvenient to employ directly. Unofficially, she was the reason Blackwater Station's deeper storage vaults had been audited 3 times in 8 months. She had arrived 6 weeks earlier following rumors about pre-grid transport corridors under the glacier and had since become a highly educated headache. Also, irritatingly, she was often right. Nessa folded her arms. "Remind me why you're here." Thalen did not take her eyes off the pit. "Because you were too busy to stop Rian from telling me there was an unexplained void collapse on Track 8. Rian looked mildly guilty for half a second. "You said not to wake the company rep." "You notice how I didn't mention the company rep and still achieved displeasure?" Ilya, who had worked around both women long enough to recognize inevitable friction as weather, stepped in before the exchange could become a hobby. "The shelf opened over some kind of station or tunnel node," she said. "I saw lights come on after the collapse." "And the lantern?" Thalen asked. Ilya hesitated. Nessa closed her eyes. Say it correctly. I found it at the pit edge after the collapse, Ilya said, then added because honesty had arrived late but forcefully, and before that I saw what looked like a woman walking under the ice carrying it. Joran made a miserable sound. Thalen did not laugh. If anything, she became more intent. Did she have horns? Thalen asked. The wind moved through the group. Nessa turned slowly toward her. Why would you ask that? Thalen met her gaze. Because there are stories. Joran snapped, if you say lantern women under the glacier, I am getting back in the crawler and living a simpler life. Thalen ignored him. Her attention stayed on Ilya. Did she? Ilya frowned, replaying the blurred impossible image under the ice. Tall figure. Lantern. Raised arm. She hadn't seen the head clearly. Or had she? Maybe, she said. I don't know. Thalen nodded once as though that confirmed something she had hoped and feared equally. Nessa hated that look on scholars. It usually meant nobody else was going to have a simple week. Start talking, she said. Thalen looked down into the pit. The amber-lit windows glowed beneath drifting snow. There's a chain of stories from the old northern convoys, she said. Before the central rail and before the grid towers. Freight caravans crossing the shelf in winter. They spoke of seeing lanterns beneath the ice, always warm light, never electric, carried by women with black horns. If a convoy followed the light, it found shelter before whiteouts. If it ignored the light, sometimes it vanished. Joran made an outraged gesture. This is not helping. It isn't meant to help, Thalen said. Rian crouched at the pit edge, shining his lamp downward. Story aside, we've got a sealed structure with internal power or residual combustion and maybe live atmosphere. That means possible survivors. Or trapped gases. Or both. Nessa seized the practical thread like a lifeline. Good. We like practical terror. Set anchors. We're sending a camera drone first. It should have stayed practical. It did not. The drone dropped on cable through the pit and descended past broken ice slabs, bent support struts, and the curved black roof of the exposed structure. Its camera fed up to Nessa's wrist screen in grainy light. A station platform. Not modern. Not company. Older than both. Curved walls of black steel and riveted glass. A sign half buried in frost letters no one in the first minute could read. Rail lines disappearing into darkness. Snow blown down through the sink opening coating the platform in white drifts over what had once been tile. And lanterns. 3 of them burned along the platform edge. No people visible. Joran leaned over Nessa's shoulder and whispered, "Oh no." The sign came clearer as the drone swung lower. Blackwater South Terminus. The group went still. Nessa looked up from the screen. That's not possible. Thalen's face had gone very calm. The original Blackwater rail line. That was a myth, Joran said weakly. Clearly not. Blackwater South Terminus had existed in planning documents and bad oral histories from the transition winters, a subglacial rail station intended to connect the first polar extraction camps before surface storms made the route impossible. Work stopped after a series of collapses, deaths, and one unexplained evacuation order that no surviving archive fully accounted for. The company histories called it impractical. The old station workers called it cursed. Over time, everyone sensible called it buried. Now it was under their boots, lights burning. Rian pointed to the screen. There. Doors cycling. On the platform below, a pair of heavy inner doors had begun to part. No mechanism was visible. No sound reached them through the ice. The doors opened onto darkness beyond. And from that darkness, one warm lantern light appeared, moving toward the platform. Joran actually took a step back from the pit. No. Nessa killed the drone feed by instinct and looked up as if expecting whatever was below to already be standing at the edge with them. Nothing was. Only the wind. Only the brass lantern near Ilya's boot. Only the sink pit breathing cold old air into the storm. Thalen spoke so quietly that everyone had to listen to hear it. She wants us to come down. No one asked how she knew. Because somehow, horribly, everyone believed her. They argued for 20 minutes in the lee of the crawler until reason thinned and necessity won. Nessa's position was simple: if there was a sealed underground station with live power and potentially accessible atmosphere under company survey ice, Blackwater needed eyes inside before the company did. Also, if there was a person down there, they were not leaving them. If there was a gas pocket, they needed to know before another shelf collapse took half a drilling team with it. All roads led downward. Joran's position was simpler: absolutely not. Rian sided with Descent because medics are often just rescuers who lost an argument with blood. Ilya sided with Descent because she had been pointed at by a ghost or hallucination or whatever lived under the ice and disliked unfinished instructions. Thalen said almost nothing until the end. Then she touched the silver rings at the base of one horn, a gesture so quick Nessa almost missed it. And said, "If this is the old station, I'm going." Nessa looked at her. Why? Thalen's gaze went to the lit sink pit. Because I think I know who built it. That bought her a harness. They anchored triple lines to the crawler and ice screws, tested air samples from the sink opening, suited for cold and collapse risk, and lowered in with enough light and equipment to convince themselves they weren't simply answering folklore with hardware. Nessa went first because leadership and control issues often shared the same skeleton. The descent shaft widened quickly below the broken shelf, opening onto the exposed station roof and then dropping another 6 meters to the platform. Her boots touched tile under drifting snow. The air was cold but breathable, dry enough to sting. It smelled faintly of old metal, oil, mineral dust, and a trace of lamp smoke no one could explain. She unclipped and turned slowly. Blackwater South Terminus lay frozen in amber gloom. The 3 lanterns along the platform burned behind cloudy glass. The arched station roof vanished into shadow beyond her headlamp range. Frost painted everything in white veins. A row of benches sat under thick dust and rime, their wooden slats somehow not entirely rotted. A ticket counter window, shattered. A mural on one far wall, half obscured, showing what looked like dark water and train lights under stars. The rail lines themselves were intact and disappeared into the black tunnel beyond the newly opened doors. Above, the rope line trembled as Ilya descended next. By the time all 5 of them stood on the platform, the place had rearranged the atmosphere inside their heads. Noise felt disrespectful. Even Joran had gone quiet. Ilya walked to the nearest lantern and crouched. "It's real flame," she murmured. Rian joined her, gloved hand near but not touching the glass. No fuel reservoir visible. "That's bad, right?" Joran asked. "I'm deciding." Thalen had moved away from them toward the wall mural. Nessa watched her for a moment, then followed. Up close the mural showed more detail than the dust first allowed. A winter sea under a black sky. Lanterns along a shoreline. And beneath the water, no, beneath ice, an arched city of lights connected by rail tunnels and stair towers. At the center stood a woman holding a lantern high, black horns sweeping back from her head like the painted silhouette of a crown. Thalen brushed frost from a line of text at the bottom of the mural. Nessa read it aloud before she could stop herself. "The keepers of the crossing light the way below." Her own voice echoed oddly. Thalen's face had gone unreadable. "My grandmother used to tell a story about them," she said. "Of course she did. She said our line came from the crossing keepers." Phelan's hand hovered over the painted horned woman without quite touching. Families who maintained under-ice way stations before the storm rail. They guided winter caravans by lantern when the surface vanished. Some coastal lines still keep the old silver bands. She touched the rings at the base of one horn again. Nessa looked at the mural, then at Phelan. "You think this is your people?" "I think," Phelan said carefully, "someone wanted them forgotten." A metallic clang echoed from deeper in the station. Everyone turned. The inner doors leading tunnel-ward had opened wider. From the darkness beyond came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Joran whispered, "I hate all of us." The footsteps stopped just short of the light. A figure stood there with a lantern. Woman-shaped. Tall. Coat long and old-fashioned. Blue skin made dim by amber glow. Black horns curving back from her head. Features difficult to hold in the eye, as though the light around her didn't want the mind to settle on specifics. She looked first at Phelan. Then at the others. Then she turned and began to walk deeper into the tunnel without a word. Ilya, voice barely above breath, said, "That's her." Nessa's training, temperament, and healthy respect for the dead all urged one simple response: leave immediately. Instead she heard herself say, "We are not following a lantern ghost into a frozen rail tunnel." The figure ahead paused. Without turning, she lifted her free hand and pointed down the track. A moment later the entire station shook. Dust and frost rained from the arched ceiling. Somewhere above, ice boomed like artillery. One of the platform lanterns flared bright. Rian grabbed Joran before the geologist lost his footing and made the rest of them regret knowing him. Nessa thumbed her wrist scanner and swore. Surface pressure jump. Another shelf is shifting. A second tremor hit, stronger. From the tunnel behind them, the one leading back under the sink opening, came the deep thunder of collapse. They all heard it. All understood it. The way back up was now likely buried. Ilya turned toward the shaft. No. Nessa was already moving, sprinting across the platform, headlamp slicing over frost and rail. The others followed because panic and discipline sometimes wore the same face. She reached the tunnel mouth just in time to see a wall of broken ice and roof-strut debris slam down across the access ramp beyond. The station lights dimmed. Joran said something unprintable. Rian exhaled once through his teeth. That way's gone. Behind them, in the amber dark, the lantern-bearing woman still waded down the opposite tunnel. Phelan looked from the collapse to the figure and said, not triumphantly but with terrible certainty, she knew. Nessa turned slowly. The woman in the tunnel inclined her head once, as if acknowledging a delayed conclusion. Then she walked on. This time Phelan moved first. The old rail tunnel curved under the glacier like the throat of some buried beast. The track bed sloped gently downward. Their lamps painted black steel ribs, frozen utility conduits, old station signs in 3 languages, maintenance alcoves packed with dust and ancient ice. Every 50 meters another lantern burned in a wall niche, each one giving off that same impossible warm steady flame. No wiring. No fuel line. No visible source. The lantern woman stayed always just ahead at the edge of sight. Near enough to follow. Too far to catch. Joran muttered constantly now, the way some people prayed when they'd run out of gods and needed the mouthwork. Not real, not possible, absolutely fraudulent geology. Rian ignored him and checked everyone's breathing rate every 10 minutes on reflex. Ilya walked with the deep alertness of a good mechanic in an old machine, listening for wrongness before it escalated. Nessa took point because leadership had become a synonym for armed skepticism. Phelan moved near the front but not beside Nessa, as if some private gravitational pull existed between her and the lantern light ahead. After the first kilometer, the tunnel widened into a junction hall. 3 tracks met there beneath a vaulted chamber hung with frozen signal banners. A rusted maintenance tram sat derailed near a wall, half encased in ice. Above the central arch, another mural stretched across the stone, trains emerging from snow into under-ice caverns full of orange lights and black water canals. Horned women at each platform, lanterns raised. Joran, unable to help himself, shone his lamp over the painted faces. Why are they always women? Thalen answered without looking back. Because they held the routes. That is not an explanation. It is where explanations begin. Nessa was about to order the team left, toward what the old map slate indicated might lead to the lower maintenance sector, when the lantern woman stopped in the center of the junction and turned fully toward them for the first time. The light lifted. Her face came clear. She looked like Thalen. Not exactly. Not enough to be mistaken in ordinary light. But enough that the resemblance hit the room like another collapse. The same sweep of horn. The same line of jaw. Older, somehow, and less solid around the edges. As if the years between them had become translucent rather than absent. Thalen went white under blue skin. "Grandmother," she whispered. The lantern woman's mouth did not move. But every lantern in the junction flared bright at once. The floor beneath the center arch lit with hidden circuitry, old gold lines blazing through black stone in a pattern of rail maps, water channels, and concentric station nodes spreading far under the glacier. A network. Bigger than a single terminus. Much bigger. Rian stared. That's not a station. That's a city. Nessa crouched over the glowing map. Tunnels branched in all directions. Reservoir icons. Heating plants. Vent towers. Transit loops. Living quarters. Central core. And one section pulsing red. Joran saw it too. What does red mean? As if in answer, a low mechanical shudder rolled through the junction. The air changed. Warmer now. Slightly humid. Carrying a smell no one there had expected beneath a glacier. Ozone. Then the PA system crackled awake overhead. A woman's voice, distorted by age and damage, filled the hall in broken fragments. Containment breach in thermal ring, repeat, evacuation incomplete, crossing keepers to lower gates. The message looped, chopped itself apart, and died in static. Ilya looked up at the speakers and then at the red pulsing sector on the map. Thermal ring. Rian's medic brain latched instantly onto implications. Heat source under pressure, trapped below ice for however many decades. If containment failed and then sealed. Nessa finished the thought. The whole lower city could be unstable. Joran made another appalled noise. Excellent. We are being guided by ancestral ghost women into a failing thermal labyrinth under a glacier. Finally, my field. Thalen had not moved. She stood facing the lantern woman with tears brightening her lower lashes in a way so controlled it made the sight harsher instead of softer. My grandmother died in the South Crossing collapse when I was 7, she said quietly. At least that's what they told us. The lantern woman lowered the light. Her expression did not change. It didn't need to. The glowing floor map shifted. A route lit from the junction to the pulsing red sector. Nessa rose. If she's showing us the containment ring, that means there's something there we need to stop. Or something she wants released, Joran said. Helpful distinction. Do you have one? No. Thalen stepped forward at last. Whatever happened here, the keepers stayed to hold it. That's what the stories said they did when the crossings failed. Nessa gave her a hard look. Stories do not get to command my team. No, Thalen said. But collapsing thermal systems do. Another tremor shook the junction, smaller but urgent. Nessa made the decision because someone had to and because every alternative now involved freezing slowly in a blocked tunnel while something mechanical under the glacier escalated beyond guesswork. We go to the thermal ring, she said. We find out what's failing. We stabilize it if possible. Then we look for another surface route. Joran pinched the bridge of his nose. This is how expedition reports become cautionary songs. Walk faster and maybe they rhyme well, Ilya said. The lantern woman turned and led them down the lit route. The lower city had once been beautiful in a way practical places rarely got permission to be. They saw it in fragments as they descended through service stairwells and glass galleries overlooking vast buried spaces under the glacier. Residential terraces ringed around warm cavern gardens now frozen silver, transit halls with ticket arches and clock faces stopped at the same minute, black water canals crossed by iron bridges delicate as lace, engine chambers with turbines silent under lacework frost, dormitories still holding coats on hooks, a schoolroom with slate maps of storm routes and a line of tiny booths near the door. Everywhere, lantern niches. Everywhere, murals of the crossing keepers with raised lights and black horns against snow and dark sea. Joran stopped making jokes after the schoolroom. That was how Nessa knew the place had finally found his fear correctly. At the last gallery before the thermal ring, the tunnel opened onto a cavern so huge the headlamps barely touched its roof. A central shaft plunged downward through layers of girders and catwalks toward a red glow pulsing far below. Steam coiled up from vents in the lower dark. Rusted lift cages hung suspended over the drop. On the nearest wall, painted letters large enough to be read from the catwalk still survived beneath frost. Thermal Regulation Corps. Rian looked over the railing and swore softly. That's alive. Barely, Nessa said. Because he was right. The red light below was not static. It surged with the irregular throb of a wounded machine under strain. If this core had once managed heat exchange beneath the glacier and it was now failing under pressure, the shelf above Blackwater could be sitting on top of a very expensive disaster. A metal screech cut through the shaft. Everyone looked up. On the far side, along an upper catwalk they hadn't yet scanned, headlamps flashed. Human voices followed. Then the unmistakable clatter of grapples hitting rail. Nessa's stomach dropped. Not company rescue. Too fast. Too quiet. Too armed. 3 figures in white thermal shells swung down onto the opposite catwalk with practiced ease, followed by 2 more. Carbines. Climbing rigs. Corporate insignia half covered with black tape. Black market extraction. Or worse. Their leader pulled off his face mask and smiled across the shaft as if arriving at a dinner invitation. Dr. Thalen Voss, he called. I hoped the stories would do the hard part for us. Thalen went still in a completely different way than she had with the lantern woman. Recognition. Disgust. Nessa glanced at her. Who? Directorate Recovery, Thalen said. Unofficial branch. The leader spread his hands. Unofficial is such an ugly word. We prefer adaptable. Nessa already had her sidearm out. You followed our route. Of course. Blackwater's company traffic is a comedy of leaks. His gaze slid past her to the thermal glow below. And now here we all are at the mouth of a buried infrastructure miracle that absolutely no one intends to report properly. Joran hissed, I knew it. The man's smile sharpened. Dr. Pike. Still publishing papers no one dangerous reads. That was one time. Thalen stepped to the rail, voice flat. You knew about the lower city. We knew there was a probability. We did not know your family legends contained a functioning access protocol. For that, truly, thank you. Nessa had heard enough. You're not taking anything out of here. That depends what taking means. He raised a compact remote in one gloved hand. We came prepared to sever unstable sections if necessary. Not ideal, but if the core collapses under our control rather than yours, that remains administratively acceptable. Rian's face hardened. You'd trigger a thermal fault under a live glacier. The man gave him the mild look of someone being questioned by furniture. A partial shelf collapse would be regrettable. The technology beneath it would still be recoverable. Ilya muttered, "I'm going to drive a drill through his teeth." The lantern woman stood at the edge of the group, light unmoving. For the first time, the corporate intruders seemed to notice her. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Who is that?" No one answered. He didn't get time to ask again. Because all through the shaft, every lantern lit at once. Up the catwalks. Along the walls. Across the frozen machinery. Hundreds of warm amber lights flaring alive through the buried city in one rising wave of gold. The white-suited intruders turned instinctively. Below, the thermal core roared. Not exploded. Woke. Steam erupted from vents. Turbine housings began to spin somewhere under the red glow. Ancient gears engaged with sounds too large to feel like hearing. The whole shaft vibrated underfoot. The lantern woman raised her light toward the opposite catwalk. And the floor under the intruders' boots opened. Two of them vanished instantly through service grates dropping out from beneath them. Another caught a railing and screamed. The leader stumbled back, remote flying from his hand into the shaft. The last two opened fire at nothing useful as amber light flooded the chamber and old station mechanisms rearranged the architecture around them. Nessa didn't waste the opening. "Move!" Her team ran for the descending stair on their side of the shaft while the buried city woke itself like an animal changing posture after a century of stillness. Gunfire crackled from behind them. One round sparked off the railing near Joran's head, producing a shriek from the geologist that Nessa decided later had contained at least 3 separate notes. Rian shoved him bodily around the stair corner. Ilya covered the rear with borrowed corporate efficiency and a station sidearm. Thalen paused once, just once, to look back at the lantern woman across the glowing shaft. The figure did not follow. She only inclined her head. And pointed downward. The thermal core chamber lay at the bottom of the shaft like the heart of a machine buried alive and too angry to die. Massive heat exchange towers rose around a central well full of red-lit vapor. Pipes the width of cargo shuttles crossed overhead in tangled grids. Control consoles curved around the well on a ring platform, their screens either dead or flickering through diagnostic storms in ancient interfaces. The air here was warmer, wet enough to pearl on the inside of their masks. Frost gave way to sweating metal. Every surface thrummed faintly. Nessa hit the nearest console and brought up what little the system would still share. Containment warning scrolled across the cracked glass in 3 languages. Thermal pressure exceeds safe threshold. Upper vent blockage detected. Manual gate alignment required. Joran, panting from exertion and panic, leaned over the panel. The upper vents iced shut when the city sealed. Pressure's been cycling in a closed loop ever since. Meaning? Rian asked. Meaning if the heat ring climbs another 10%, it fractures the lower exchange pipes, flash thaws the surrounding shelf, and then. The glacier drops on us, Ilya said. Joran looked offended. That is a reductive but emotionally accurate summary. Nessa scanned the control layout. Can we release pressure? Not from here alone, Joran said. The gate system is manual hybrid. Needs alignment from the ring stations. Thalen had already moved to a circular recess in the floor at the center of the control platform. It looked ceremonial until one noticed the connector ports. She knelt, touching the engraved metal around it. There were symbols there matching the silver bands on her horns. Nessa felt sudden certainty. Don't. Thalen looked up. This is a keeper's lock. That is why I said don't. If the station was keyed to the keepers, then it may kill you faster than the glacier will. The chamber shook with another pressure surge. Steam screamed through an overhead pipe seam. Rian swore and dragged Joran out of the spray path just before scalding vapor blasted across the platform. "We are," Rian said with admirable restraint, "running short on time." Thalen rose. There was fear in her face now. Real, unhidden. And under it something worse, recognition of duty, the sort inherited people spend years trying not to resemble until the resemblance appears anyway. "My grandmother wasn't a station casualty," she said quietly. "She stayed down here." No one contradicted her. "Maybe," Thalen went on, "the city didn't keep them as ghosts." Nessa's jaw tightened. "Do not romanticize this while it's trying to boil us." A burst of automatic gunfire rattled from the upper access stair. The surviving intruders had found another way down. Ilya snapped up her pistol. "That solves our schedule." Nessa looked at the chamber, the console readouts, the keeper's lock, her team, the approaching armed idiots above, and made the sort of decision that later feels inevitable only because all better options died first. "Mercer, Pike, manual gates. Take the east maintenance bridge and align whatever still moves." She pointed before either could object. "Ilya, with them. Shoot anyone corporate or ancestral who causes problems." "Thalen, with me." Thalen blinked. "You're allowing this?" "I'm supervising it." That was enough. The team split. Rian, Joran, and Ilya sprinted across the maintenance bridge into the steam and red glow beyond the core ring while gunfire cracked again from the access stair. Nessa shoved Thalen toward the keeper's recess and took cover behind a console, firing 3 hard rounds at the descending intruders. One dropped. The others scattered into the machinery's shadows with professional speed. "Do it!" Nessa shouted. Thalen pulled off one glove. Her blue hand looked almost black in the red core light. She placed it on the metal recess. Nothing happened. Then the silver bands around her horns began to glow. Not brightly. Just enough. The lock accepted them like memory taking a breath. All through the chamber, hidden circuits woke. The central well flared white-red. Thalen gasped and doubled over as if something had reached out from the station and gripped her spine. Nessa left cover long enough to yank her upright by the harness. "Stay with me." Thalen's eyes had gone glassy. She sucked air. "It's not a lock. It's an interface. Can you use it?" "I think it's using me." Up on the access stair, the corporate leader appeared through steam with 2 surviving operators behind him. He'd lost his polite smile somewhere in the shaft. "Good. This is your final opportunity," he shouted over the machinery. "Walk away and the directorate may still consider amnesty for unlawful interference." Ilya's voice echoed back from the East Bridge before Nessa could answer. "I have considered amnesty and chosen violence." A shot rang out. One of the operators fell sideways through the railing. The leader swore and retreated again. Nessa almost smiled. Then every screen in the chamber changed. Diagnostic text vanished. In its place appeared a schematic of the lower city and a human figure rendered in old amber linework standing at the thermal ring center with one hand raised. Beneath it scrolled a message. "Keeper presence confirmed. Succession unresolved. Choose the crossing." Thalen stared at it, breathing hard. "Succession," she whispered. Nessa had no patience for ceremony under pressure. "In useful language." Thalen looked at the glowing schematic, then at the central well, then at Nessa with terrible clarity. "The station needs a keeper. Not just for the gate. For the full ring balance. When the city sealed, someone stayed bound into the system to hold the thermal load manually. If the succession was never completed. Nessa understood before she finished. The Lantern Woman. The Keepers. Held not by ghosts perhaps, but by a system built to preserve function longer than flesh. Joran's voice crackled over the teen comm from somewhere in the East Ring. We have one manual gate moving and another that appears to hate me personally. Rian, further back, pressure still climbing. The chamber trembled. A support light blew out overhead. Thalen looked at the keeper's interface again. Nessa saw the decision forming and hated it on sight. No. If I complete the succession. No. She's been holding this alone for decades. Maybe. That doesn't mean I volunteer you next. The words hit harder than Nessa intended. Hard enough to expose more than command should have. Thalen noticed. Of course she did. Behind them, the corporate leader made one final mistake. He broke cover to shoot the interface console. Nessa turned and put a round through his shoulder before he finished the motion. He spun, fell into a side gantry, and vanished into steam shouting. One operator remained. Ilya solved that from across the chamber with cold mechanical precision. Silence returned in ugly pieces between the machines. Thalen's mouth trembled once. Not with fear. With restraint. You don't understand, she said softly. This place chose my family. Nessa stepped closer until the red light from the well cut both their faces into sharp planes. No. Your family was used by this place. There is a difference. Another shudder rolled through the core. A pipe burst below the ring in a spray of white steam. Joran yelped over comms. This is becoming unacademic. Rian, tell me when to align. Thalen looked from Nessa to the interface, to the amber schematic still waiting for a keeper, to the deep red glow of a system holding too much heat and too much history. Then she did something Nessa had not anticipated. She took Nessa's hand. Not dramatic. Not for comfort. For grounding. The contact stunned Nessa's thoughts clear for half a second. Thalen's grip was cold, strong, and shaking. She doesn't want replacement, Thalen said. She wants release. Nessa stared at her. Then at the screen. Keeper presence confirmed. Succession unresolved. Choose the crossing. Not accept. Not bind. Choose. Outside the control platform, the old city groaned around them like a beast remembering its injuries. Nessa understood in a rush. This system is holding the ring because it was never taught another choice, she said. Thalen nodded. My line kept the crossings. Not the machine. The machine only learned one answer. Rian's voice again, urgent now. We are out of elegant options. Nessa squeezed Thalen's hand once and let go. Then teach it another. Thalen turned back to the interface. This time she placed both hands on the recess and leaned into it not as sacrifice but as command. The silver bands on her horns flared brighter. Amber light flooded up her arms in branching lines. She spoke in a language none of them knew and all of them somehow understood in intent if not grammar. A series of short hard phrases like route calls in a storm. Not surrender. Instruction. The screens changed. The schematic split into branching paths. Above the chamber, deep in the upper city, vents began opening one by one with the thunder of released locks. Joran's voice broke high with astonishment. The gate train's moving. Align. Nessa shouted. Rian, on it. Ilya, tell the machine I said thank you for finally doing its job. Pressure values on the main console began dropping. Not fast enough. Not yet. The old PA crackled overhead and, for one brief clear second, the same woman's voice from the junction came through without distortion. Crossing acknowledged. Keeper relieved. The lanterns in the chamber dimmed. A warm gust moved through the core room as upper vents finally breached their ice seals. Then the whole station shook with a release so powerful it knocked everyone off balance. Red glare flooded white. Steam roared upward through the central shaft and away into the buried city above. Nessa hit the floor hard, rolled, came up on one knee, and looked for Thalen through the blinding light. The woman at the interface had gone still. Too still. Thalen. Nessa reached her in 3 strides and caught her as she sagged sideways from the recess. Her eyes were closed. Her pulse, there, fast but real beneath the jaw. Alive. Rian pelted across the platform seconds later, shoving Joran ahead of him. Move. Let me. Nessa let him, barely. Rian checked pupils, pulse, breathing, and the weird amber burns fading from Thalen's wrists with medic efficiency sharpened by concern he was not trying especially hard to hide from himself anymore. She's exhausted, he said. Neurological shock, maybe. But she's here. The chamber lights stabilized. Pressure warnings cleared from the consoles one by one. In the calm that followed, a single lantern remained lit on the far side of the room. The lantern woman stood there. No longer flickering. No longer blurred. For a second Nessa saw her clearly enough to understand the resemblance to Thalen and the weight of years between them. Not grandmother exactly. Something older in the line. A keeper preserved by systems, duty, and the refusal to let a city die badly. The woman raised the lantern once. In farewell. Then the flame went out. She was gone. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Joran sat down abruptly on the nearest floor grate and said, with heartfelt conviction, I am changing fields. They did not get out quickly. The upper vents had opened, yes, stabilizing the thermal ring and preventing the worst collapse, but the route back to the original sink pit remained blocked by ice and structural failure. Blackwater South had other exits, however, routes the old city now seemed willing to reveal. Guide lights woke ahead of them. Locked doors unsealed. Map panels lit along the walls in amber lines. The buried station wanted them gone alive. Nessa was willing to accept help from haunted infrastructure when offered. They moved through maintenance corridors warmed now by returning circulation, carrying Thalen between Nessa and Ilya whenever she couldn't manage her own feet. Joran and Rian handled the route markers. Above and around them the hidden city breathed itself awake in pieces. Pumps restarting, heat moving through dead pipes, old clocks twitching, frost receding from windows to reveal long-buried chambers full of benches, canteens, dormitories, offices, signal rooms, and one chapel-like hall lined with extinguished lantern racks that made even Joran cross himself out of sequence. At one junction they found the surviving corporate intruder pinned beneath a fallen gate brace, alive enough to curse them and plead in alternating order. Nessa took his comms, his access slate, and his weapon, then left him with a thermal blanket and exact coordinates for a retrieval nobody would prioritize before daylight. Mercy, she believed, need not be warm to count. Their exit surfaced 12 kilometers east of Blackwater in a collapsed vent tower ringed with blue ice and old warning pylons. Dawn had already begun silvering the shelf when they climbed out into a world washed clean by wind. The storm had passed. The glacier stretched beneath pale sky like a country trying to remember whether it was dead. The rescue crawlers from station found them by beacon 30 minutes later. Back at Blackwater, the aftermath unfolded in overlapping disasters of the bureaucratic and emotional varieties. The company wanted statements. Nessa gave them partial truths and a face that discouraged follow-up. The Polar Heritage Office wanted records. Thalen, once awake enough to weaponize language again, informed them that any excavation below Track 8 now fell under emergency cultural protection and would be met with national injunction if handled by corporate contractors. Rian treated burns, steam scalds, and one deep bruise on Nessa's hip she had not noticed until her body filed a formal complaint. Joran drank enough coffee to challenge medical science and started drafting a report titled, in a fit of exhausted honesty, Preliminary Observations on the Apparently Impossible. Ilya returned to Track 8 by midday with a survey drone and discovered the sink pit had half-sealed overnight in a controlled collapse. Not hidden again, exactly. Simply protected. The access remained, but only through routes the old station now chose to make visible. By evening, word had already spread through Blackwater in the mutating way station stories did. A buried city under the glacier. Lantern women. An old rail line. A keeper released. A blue-horned historian talking a machine out of sacrificing itself. None of the versions were accurate enough to satisfy Nessa. Most of them, she suspected, would survive longer than accuracy ever did. She found Thalen that night on the outer observation deck wrapped in a station blanket and staring over the ice fields toward the dark where Track 8 lay hidden. The aurora moved above them in green and white curtains. Below, station floodlights painted the snow in hard industrial gold. Nessa stepped beside her without speaking for a while. Thalen broke first, as Nessa had known she would. "I remember her now," she said quietly. Nessa glanced at her. "From the station?" "From stories. My grandmother used to say our line once kept the crossings with light and heat. She stopped talking about it after my mother died." Thalen rubbed one thumb over the silver bands at her horns. "I thought it was family poetry. Then history. Then propaganda. I didn't think," she laughed once, short and stunned. "I didn't think it was waiting under a glacier." Nessa leaned on the railing beside her. The metal bit cold through her gloves. "You told the machine no," she said. Thalen looked over. "You did." "I was shouting. It counted." The aurora shifted green across Thalen's blue skin and the black arcs of her horns. For the first time since Nessa had known her, the woman looked less like a sharpened argument wearing a coat and more like someone allowing herself the possibility of not carrying everything alone. That made the next sentence dangerous. "What happens now?" Nessa asked. Thalen's gaze returned to the ice. "Now everyone with money, rank, or ambition tries to claim what's under there." "Yes. And we make that difficult." A faint smile tugged at Nessa's mouth. "There you are." Thalen's expression softened by a degree. "You really don't like being thanked, do you?" "No." Tragic. Silence again, but a better kind. Far off beyond the station lights, somewhere under the glacier, a line of warm amber points appeared briefly beneath the black ice and moved like lanterns along a buried road. Nessa saw them. So did Thalen. Neither woman spoke. They simply watched until the lights faded. At last Thalen said, very softly, "I don't think they're gone." Nessa looked out over the frozen dark. "No," she said. "I think they're making sure we learn the route." Below them, Blackwater Station rattled and hummed and pretended to be permanent. Beneath it, older machinery had chosen to wake on different terms. And under the glacier roads no modern map admitted, lanterns were moving again.